6 Radio Company presents another adventure in the Stanley Jones School by Radio of Fully Alive Living. And today, some Stanley Jones stories that we all need to hear and know. Greetings once again, and welcome, my friends, to another edition of the Stanley Jones Radio School for Fully Alive Living. My name is Stan Houston, and it's my privilege and my pleasure to be with you once again today to hopefully learn a little bit more about how we could be fully alive, starting right now and, of course, forever. Stanley Jones did a lot of great stuff. In fact, the more I study him, the greater he becomes. Very much so. If we were in the business of having saints of our particular tradition, I think we would have another Saint Stanislaus or Saint Stanley. Maybe certainly not named after me, but just simply in terms of the wisdom, insight, and truth that he brings forward, and even still today. So that's what I want to talk about, and I have a few questions for you and a few suggestions for you today. So let's go. Now, I sent out a little memo, just kind of a teaser or trailer, and I asked you to think about this. I wanted you to look at the book that's now 100 years old, and that, of course, is, Christ, the Indian Road, and celebrate it. And there's been a new edition, expanded. Our colleague Leonard Sweet was partly responsible for that, along with Ann Matthews Eunice and Ambington. We thank them for what they have done. Now, let me just ask you this question. If we could have a little bit of a real miracle, that maybe that God would grant us the mystery of the spirit, maybe even the personality of Stanley Jones could come back to us this summer. And many of you are going to go on retreats and fellowships, things like that. Would you invite him to come? Okay. Would you? He's pretty challenging. He's pretty strong. As I say, he doesn't do a lot of TOT. He's not into a lot of theories of theology. He's very much into stories of transformation, which is what I think we should be about. Transformed lives. And there's something you have to do to do that. Like I said before, you have to put your hands up and say, I surrender. By the way, it might help to learn to sing. I read an old book, again, 100 years old, Streams in the Desert, and one of the suggestions they had was that if we really want to have a good day, we should sing a song in the morning. And we should sing a song just before we go to bed. Sing a morning song. Like someone said, morning glory. And then evening grace. Sing a song before you go to bed. Maybe those of you who are going on retreats, maybe you want to make a practice of that to see what might happen. Morning glory, sing a song right away. Evening grace, before you retire, sing a song. Now, I encourage you, again, the Christ of the Indian Road, and let me tell you what I want you to do. Now, I'm going to change to my reading glasses. My grandson said, Grandpa, what happened to your hair? And then he said, Grandpa, why don't you get some funky glasses? You need some funky glasses, Grandpa. So please, my grandson, I went and got some funky glasses, reading glasses. Okay, here we go. I wanted you to go to page 88 in the new edition. We want the East to keep its own soul. Only thus can it be creative. We are not there to plaster Western civilization upon the East, to make it a pale copy of ourselves. We must go deeper, infinitely deeper than that. Again, we are not there to give its people a blocked off, rigid ecclesiastical and theological system saying to them, take this in its entirety or nothing. As I said, every person who's in ministry and leaders and teachers, pastors, should read this chapter 7 times. Now, part of that comes, I'm a longtime business performance coach, and one of my coaches, everybody needs a coach. And so even those of us who are coaches need a coach. Everybody needs a mentor. Everybody needs a sponsor. Okay? That's just part of life. Okay. And he taught me this. He gave me a cassette tape that he had a lesson on. It's about 55 minutes, cassette. Dates me, of course. And I said, what do you want me to do with it? And he said, I want you to listen to it 7 times. I said, 7 times? And he said, yes, 7 times. And so I did. Then he gave me a transcript of that. I said, okay, well, I've listened to it 7 times. Now what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to read this 7 times. He said, 7 is the way to remember something. If you read it 7 times, if you listen to it 7 times, you'll never forget it. It'll become a part of you. Yeah. Well, that's a little bit of why I would say you should read this 7 times. In effect, he goes on to say that, in effect, we will put our civilization and our ecclesiastical systems at the disposal of India to take as much as may suit their purposes, but we do not insist upon these. We will give them Christ and urge them to interpret him through their own genius and life. Then the interpretation will be firsthand and vital. Here's a principle, it's kind of me, but I kind of learned it a little bit from my study of Stanley Jones. I call it, it's a Houstedism. But here's what I've learned in my many years of being a broadcaster and as a teacher and a business coach. Here, a truth told is good, but seldom heard. Yeah. A truth revealed has greater yield. Yeah, you just, reveal it to them, show it to them. Greater yield. But a truth discovered is best of all. And a truth imposed is no truth at all. Our mission is to help people discover the truth for themselves, because then it is theirs. It is theirs. And that's very unique and very new and very different. If we think of our communication to be something that what we do is help people discover the truth for themselves. I told a young pastor who needed some counsel, I said, you know what? You're a good and bright young man, but when you speak, I get the feeling that you're preaching at me. At me. And sometimes I get the feeling that maybe it's a little better, you're preaching to me. You know what? I would prefer if you'd speak with me. And I would prefer that you perhaps did the Jesus thing and told good stories and asked good questions. And from your storytelling and your questioning and asking, I would walk away and say, wow, I will have discovered something. And it's true. And it belongs to me. Well, may I encourage you. And then he goes on to do this. We believe that Jesus, in a supreme way, gives things that we need. Now, he talks about the belief system. He says each system must be judged by its output, by its fruit. The outcome is the criterion. What are we trying to produce? The ends of the different systems of thought and faith may be summed up as follows. The Greeks said, be moderate, know thyself. Rome said, be strong, order thyself. Confucius says, be superior, correct thyself. Shintoism says, be loyal, suppress thyself. Buddhism says, be disillusioned, annihilate thyself. Judaism says, be holy, conform thyself. Modern materialism says, be industrious and enjoy yourself. Modern hedonism says, be broad, cultivate thyself, enjoy thyself. Christianity says, be Christ-like, give thyself. How would Stanley Jones talk to you this summer if he could come and speak to you? Just thought I would ask. I would love to hear from you. Again, this is a faith adventure, and I would be grateful if you'd recommend us and if you would help sponsor us. And we perhaps have a little bit of wisdom, insight, and truth. We're half done. All right. We'll take a little break and we'll be back. Greetings and welcome back. And during the break, my wife said to me, Stan, I think you can put your regular glasses back on. And usually I do what she tells me to do. Here in the second part, I wanted to spend a little time with this book here. It, again, has struck me deeply. Now, thanks to Anne Matthews Eunice, who many of you know, the granddaughter of Stanley Jones, has done the incredible, wonderful work. She single-handedly has been the woman behind the preservation and the restoration and hopefully the legacy leaving of the work of Stanley Jones. Other organizations have kind of, yes, they've acknowledged him, tipped their hat to him, but she is the one who has faithfully through the years done the work of getting the works republished in bigger print from oftentimes what were called the wartime editions, and preserving the real written legacy of Stanley Jones, and actually having books about her, the wife. Yes, remember the story of Mabel. And this is another book that she put out, The Life and Ministry of Mary Webster, a witness in the evangelistic ministry of Stanley Jones. And this book I've been struck by it. I've started to read it, and right off the bat, there were things that I would recommend that you actually spend some time with too. So if you haven't read this book, I would encourage you to go to the StanleyJonesFoundation.org or eStanleyJonesFoundation.org, and perhaps you can order the book. Now, Anne and the foundation have been ones who have really been supportive of this, my effort, and hopefully our effort together to create living encores of Stanley Jones, and then to create living messages on the video that'll be around. The internet videos will be around for a long, long time. And there will be people who can actually see people tell the story, get the coaching, and more understand just how significant his work and word was and still is. And as I read, I am more and more convinced that he's still a man ahead of his times. And one of the reasons was that in the introduction that Anne wrote for this book, may I just share some things? And I had said before that I thought it was very important that pastors and preachers and professional people would read the chapter there on what really is mission about. But this is also something that I would really encourage our professional clerical people to get involved, because here's the story she tells. Jones was convinced that the revitalization of the Christian church was going to come through the laity. He pointed out, for example, that Jesus was a layman, and it was a group of scattered, non-apostolic Christians who founded the church at Antioch. However, according to Jones, in the 3rd century, the laity was pushed to the edges of the church, and the clergy became the focus and the central decision makers. Jones comments on this history recorded in Acts 6:4 of the relegation of the laity to the edges of Christianity. Now, here's what he said. Think about this. I have the feeling that the disciples made a bit of a blunder when they said, we will give ourselves, okay, next page, here we go, we will give ourselves to prayer and the ministry of the word, and we'll turn over this other work, that is the serving of tables, to the lay people. Now that may seem a very spiritual step. The apostles would give themselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word and turn over to the lay people the manage of the material side of things. He goes on to say, personally, I've come to the conclusion that they missed their step. At this point, they drove a little bit of a wedge into the life between the material and the spiritual. The spiritual was up here and the material was down there. The apostles would give themselves to the spiritual, and another group, a lay group, would give itself to the material. I believe this is part of the problem of the sacred and the secular distinction between the spiritual and the material. Well, I would really encourage you to read more of what Anne has to say in the introduction, because I'm a lay person. You know, I'm not a pastor, a preacher, a prophet. I have none of those. I was commissioned as a missionary because as a lay person, I went out as a missionary broadcaster because that's what I was. I was a teacher and a broadcaster, but I wasn't a theologian. I didn't go to seminary or anything like that. I oftentimes say that I'm just kind of a little bit of an overeducated disc jockey who is in love with Jesus. And since I'm a broadcaster, I want to share God's wisdom and tell the Jesus story. And of course, that's part of the attraction of Stanley Jones, is that he was offered kind of the role of bishop to be an ordained person. And I think the story is that as soon as he was appointed, he resigned. And he preferred to go by brother, as a brother, sister, rather than by the more formal titles that we usually give. And that he did not go, even though he had come under the commission of the Methodist congregations, who are very much methodical, mission-minded people. He knew that he was called not to be an American Methodist missionary. He was called to be a witness to Jesus in India. And so what is true is the story of Mary is a story of a very unique person who was very much involved in the ministry of Stanley Jones, and her ups and downs and backs and forth, her very human story of being a woman. And keep in mind, before women were given almost any real significant role in the church, she was a significant lay minister, lay witness, and certainly a real partner in the ministry of Stanley Jones. And her story is so well put together. And I would really encourage you to go to the Stanley Jones Foundation. And, some of you are going to go on retreats. I would encourage you to perhaps get a copy of this book. And while you're doing your retreat, why don't you read it? Or why don't you share some of the stories together? Because she's truly an inspiration. And more, as one of my pastor friends said to me, because I'm 40 or 50 hours a week in the marketplace. And he said, Stan, he said, I get to see them 1 hour a week. You get to see them all week. And so, you're going to have to be a minister. And he said, you're going to have to be a kind of a fifth gospel. The four gospels are testimonies of laymen who, in effect, told their story. And all of us may be called to be the fifth gospel to somebody. So may I encourage you to do that. And Anne will be joining us on a number of programs. She has so many responsibilities, and I simply want to help her keep the mission going by relieving her of some of those responsibilities and helping her have more opportunities in her life and business. And it is a ministry, but she has to run it as a business. It has bills that have to be paid, and the people who print books don't do it for free. And those people who work very, very hard to do some of the work on it, they need to be compensated. St. Paul, a businessman, said, a workman is worthy of his or her hire. So I just encourage you today, as you're thinking about how the church should perhaps begin to approach the era of diminishing church attendance, diminishing numbers of younger people who are calling themselves nuns, as opposed to, not nuns, N-U-N-S, nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They don't have any faith effort at all. That in effect, we may want to see that our mission is to help those laity, those lay men and women who are in the marketplace. As my pastor mentor said, Stan, I can get them ready for worship and discipleship, but you've got to help them get ready for Monday. And I think that's part of what I try to do. There we go. I hope you'll think about these things. Again, we are looking forward to your participation. I will be calling 2 or 3 of you who have raised your hand and said, Stan, maybe I could be helpful to you. And they have some great stories to tell and great opportunities to share. And so I'll be looking forward to that. So I would appreciate if you would think about being a member of the school, the Stanley Jones Radio School for Fully Alive Living Now and Forever. So reach out to me at stan@witradio.net. stan@witradio.net. That stands for What It Takes Radio. I'm just a radio guy. And let's see if we can put a real, almost lay entrepreneur and evangelist, Stanley Jones, back in the mainstream of church thinking. And since many of the men and women who, we just saw were a number of the men and women who were alive for World War II. Now it's 80 years, the war was over, and these people have passed on. Well, much of the same thing is true of the people who knew Stanley Jones, that they are obviously in advanced age. And we want to preserve the encore by giving more and more modern media to the world about Stanley Jones and helping younger men and women to say, you know what? I'd like to learn. I'd like to be a disciple of that man. I'd like to know more about what he did. And as I point out, I've always been fascinated. Some of you may have seen some of the impression I got when I watched The Chosen. That one of the first stories is the release of Mary Magdalene. They didn't start with the Christmas story. They started with the release of Mary Magdalene from the demons that plagued her. And that, in effect, she became one of the most significant and brave and courageous followers of the Lord Jesus. And so I oftentimes call that the Magdalene factor. And we want more Magdalene factors in the church today. Thank you for listening. Some of you are happy, some of you are not so happy, but I hope this has been challenging to you. All of our thoughts are given with the recognition that we could be wrong and you could be right. But as I often said on the radio, just let it sit on your head and your heart for your thought and consideration. I hope you'll join us again. We've got lots to enjoy learning together on the Stanley Jones Fully Alive Radio School. Please join us. Again, Stan at witradio.net, Stan at witradio.net. All the best and blessings. Remember, hands up, surrender to Jesus, because truly, he's the Lord. Yes, he is. He's the man. Bye for now.